I live alone in a one-bedroom apartment. So can anyone tell me why there was a woman sitting on my couch watching TV? I was in my room getting some work done when I had gotten a bit hungry and planned on walking to the kitchen to get some leftover Chinese food. My kitchen sits next to the living room, and as soon as I stepped into the dark hallway, I noticed the television was on. I know I never stopped to watch anything on it, so this was an immediate red flag. Thinking that maybe it was updating, or maybe Alexa had switched it on by mistake, I walked over to turn it off. But my heart dropped when I saw a woman with oily black hair sitting on my couch watching it. For a moment, I was confused because I knew there was no one here when I walked in, and I knew all the doors and windows were locked. From the time I came home, I hadn't heard anyone break in, so how the hell could a person be sitting there? After the confusion passed, I wanted to walk forward and ask what the hell she was doing in my house, but something screamed that that would be a grave mistake. If anyone has ever experienced sleep paralysis, that's what the feeling was like. I told my body to move, but the primal part of my brain refused vehemently. I slowly crept back inside my room and just waited in silence. At this point, I know you're already screaming at me to call the cops, and trust me, I wanted to. Nothing at that moment would have made me feel better than to have one or two armed police officers there to deal with her so that I didn't have to. But if I'm being honest, I didn't want her to hear me talking. If she had walked to my room, I'd be trapped, and at that moment, I felt like that'd be a nightmare. After waiting for half an hour in silence, I mustered up enough courage to at least observe and see what she was up to. Forcing myself up, I cracked the door open just enough to get a clear view of the hallway and look at where she was sitting. If I didn't know any better, I'd have thought she had legitimately just stumbled into the wrong house and was relaxing like any normal person. But something was off. It almost looked as if she was slumped forward on the couch. Part of me wanted to believe she was sleeping, but what I saw next shattered all hope of that. She reached a disgustingly long arm towards the door and unlocked it from her seated position with ease. I haven't measured yet, but eyeballing the distance from my couch to the door, it had to be at least 8 or 9 feet away on the low end. She slowly stood up and made a clumsy effort to walk towards it. Her body was horrifying. She was tall, uncomfortably so. If I had to guess, I'd say she was maybe over 9 feet, with arms that touched the ground and dragged behind her. Her hands each sported roughly 11 fingers that had to each be around a foot in length. From what I remember, she was completely naked, with sagging skin that hung loosely off of her extremely thin body. She was also paler than I thought possible. Her skin appeared almost grey, and if I didn't know any better, I'd think her skin belonged to that of someone recently deceased. She didn't move gracefully. She dragged her massive body towards the door and raised her long arm towards the doorknob to pull it open. It almost looked like she had to break her own bones to complete the movement. But as she pulled the door open and moved a spindly leg outside, she stopped. My blood ran cold as she slowly turned her head towards me, and I caught a glimpse of her face. I wanted to scream when I didn't see any eyes. Just a puffy exterior with sagging eye holes and a mouth with long rubbery lips that drooped past her shoulders in a permanent look of anguish. I didn't know if she saw me, or if she even had the capability to. All I remember was her turning her head back outside and leaving my home. I rushed outside with my phone to see if I could catch her on video, and I wish I hadn't. I wish I had just closed the door and gone to sleep, or gotten drunk and tried to pass the whole thing off as a fucked up nightmare. But what I saw was, I know it was real. I looked outside in the cold dark, and I saw her hanging off the side of the building like a fucking spider. The window of the person above me was open. She was fishing inside, and after a few seconds of searching, she pulled out their son. Her hand was completely wrapped around the head, and I couldn't tell if they were alive or dead by the time she slinked off into the darkness with a young boy. I had caught it all on video. I must have watched that video 100 times before deleting it. I mean, what the fuck was I supposed to do with it? Do you think the police would believe it's a real piece of evidence? Even if they did, what the hell could they do? And as a parent, are you better off thinking that your kid ran away or knowing that it was taken by an entity that we can't even begin to comprehend? At least with the former, you have hope that maybe you'll see them again. I just couldn't bring myself to bring up such a crazy notion to a grieving family. Or worse, have them believe me and go looking for something that no one should ever try and find. I knew, as long as I kept it, I'd be tempted to watch it, and every time I watched it, I'd be driven further into madness. There have been more stories of kids missing as of late. I've even heard some rumors about pets going missing from people's homes. Surprisingly enough, I even heard a story about a full-grown man disappearing. He was never seen again, with absolutely no trace of where he went or why he left. The only thing suggesting any kind of outside force was an open window, and a few strands of hair police couldn't match any DNA too. This has taken quite a toll on my life. I tried to find info on this thing, but as far as I know, there's nothing. If anyone out there has had a similar experience, please tell your story or share images of the thing if you have them. I just want to know I'm not crazy. I'm quitting my job tomorrow and staying with my brother on the other side of the country. There's no fucking way I'm sticking around that thing more than I need to. I don't plan on being here much longer, but last night I heard a knocking at my door. I know the next time I see it, I won't be telling a story afterward. But I also know I'm burning this whole damn apartment down with me. It all started after moving into my new house. Yeah, that pretty. Believe me, I know, but it's what happened. I never experienced anything supernatural before, and, though interested, I never really expected anything to happen to me. I was able to rent the house for pretty cheap. I didn't think anything of it because it was old and not in the best of neighborhoods, so I guessed I just got a good deal. After moving everything in, things were fine for a while. I don't remember exactly when it started, because it seemed so minor at the time. I'd leave a light on in the kitchen or the bathroom and come back to find it off. Honestly, I thought I was just forgetting that I turned them off already when I came back. After a while, I began to wonder and started leaving a couple lights on purpose. Sometimes, nothing would happen. Sometimes, I'd come back to find the lights turned off. By now, I figured out that something was off. I wasn't really scared, but just confused. I thought maybe something was wrong with the electronics. I started leaving lights on a bit more often, because I thought I might be able to get some sign of why they would randomly shut off. That's when it started to take another turn. The first real time I remember something crazy happening was when I left the kitchen and living room light on while I was asleep. I woke up to a deep, rumbling growl coming from the kitchen. Now, from the bedroom, you can see down the hall to the living room, and that room is connected to the kitchen. I remember waking up and thinking that there was an animal or something in my house. I looked down the hall toward the living room to see the light darken. Somebody had flicked off the light from the kitchen. Another low growl came, this time from the living room, and I nearly screamed, as I saw something bolt across the length of the hall opening. And then, the living room light went out. I couldn't tell exactly what it was though. It just seemed like a black shadow or something. It didn't really matter. I was scared shitless. I bolted from my bed then and threw on the bedroom light, expecting something to be in this room and getting ready to come after me. Nothing. There wasn't anything in the room. I let out a low breath, and then I slowly moved down the hall into the living room. Once I got to the end, I practically ran to throw on the light switch there. Again, nothing. Kitchen next, and, once again, nothing. I was starting to think I dreamed all of it before I went to turn off the kitchen light and stopped. Now, I was a grown man. But here I was, terrified to turn off that switch. And I'll admit it, I slept with all the lights on that night. That was a mistake. When I woke up the next morning, all the lights were off once again. I went to push myself out of bed and winced as my body felt sore. I pulled the sheets off to see long red marks running down along my legs and arms. It looked like something scratched me in the night. That terrified the hell out of me, but not nearly so much as what I saw around the house. Every light I left on was smashed. Every light bulb that was on last night was broken. Every lamp knocked over and smashed in. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around. Something was fucked up as hell here, and something tried to, well, do something to me. I called in for work that day and went to immediately replace all the lights. I didn't know what to do then. I thought about leaving, and I know this probably sounds stupid, but this was my home. It was my first time away from my family, and this was my home. I couldn't give it up. So, I stayed, even as it got worse. Even though I was beginning to become terrified of the dark, I couldn't really sleep with the light on me at night in the bedroom. I'd leave other lights on though, like in the hall or the living room, giving myself enough to see pretty well in my darker room. And, almost every night, I'd wake up in the middle of the night to hear something growling and prowling around the living room, and then the lights would shut off. I didn't want to go look. I was terrified at the thought of being in the same room with whatever was in there. So I curled up in bed and prayed it never came in. One night after this went on for a while, I had it. I bought a gun and turned on every light in the house. Then I sat down in the middle of the living room with my gun in my lap and a baseball bat sitting next to me. I waited. There was nothing at first for a long time. At around 2 in the morning, I began to hear it. Oddly, it was behind me. I turned and peeked toward the hall to my bedroom and could hear that familiar growl. I swallowed and held my gun in one hand and the bat in the other and slowly began to step around to get a better view of bedroom from the living room. As I began to get a view of my bed, I heard a loud thump, followed by an inhuman roar. I, being the brave man I was, jumped back and away from the hallway. I wanted to end this all, but, dear God, I didn't want to deal with that thing. I could hear tearing and smashing, and I don't know how I caught it, but I did manage to hear an audible click, and then nothing. Slowly, I went back to peek down the hall, and the light was off once again. A deep breath, and I ventured forth, my weapons ready. When I came to my bedroom and flicked the light back on, I gasped. My bed was ravaged, torn completely apart. It was like some animal had jumped into it and just ripped it to shreds. I stepped forward to look at what was left of my bed and just stood in shock for who knows when. It wasn't until I heard the sound of a familiar growl that I turned around. Standing near my door, right at the light switch, was when I finally saw it. It was a man, a white and rotting man with a mangled body that looked like he had once been a dog's chew toy, staring at me. I was too in shock to even raise my weapons. He stared at me for just a moment and then flicked off the light. I screamed. I'm not even ashamed to admit it. I screamed and bolted. I didn't care if that was where that man had been standing. I ran right past where I had seen him, swinging my bat like a madman. I nearly put a hole in the hallway as I ran through into the safe light of the hall. I turned to look back then, just in time to see him once again near the hall's light switch. He turned that one off too. By then, I didn't want to fight. I wanted to be safe. I burst past the living room and into the brightness of my kitchen. I heard the sound of growling and scratching nearly all around me then, and I knew he was coming back. I looked back to once again see that mangled and rotten corpse of a man turn off another light with a broken finger and plunge me into terrifying darkness. I broke for the living room. This was going to be my final stand. I'd have to fight here. I drew close to the standing lamp that was my last line of defense. It hated the dark, so I'd stay right here, next to this comforting standing lamp. I waited for it to turn off, but it never did. I looked around and quiet. Nothing but quiet. I turned then to look at that saving grace of a lamp that refused to yield. I started to find myself laughing. A crazy but alive laugh, and I thought I'd finally be okay. I stepped closer, and I swear I almost hugged that lamp, until I saw it. I heard the growl first coming not from behind me, but in front, from that lamp. My eyes widened, and I stared as the light from that lamp intensified. I stumbled back, and I don't know what happened, but I think I tripped on something. I just know I found myself flat on my back, staring up at that bright, intense light. It wasn't comforting any longer, just hot and heavy and bright. I thought it was going to burn me away, and then it came. I don't have words to describe what poured from that lamp's light. It was hideous, twisted, and filled with rage. I know I'll never forget those eyes though. Bright, hot, and white. Two glowing circles of pure malice. It hated me. It hated everything about me. And not just me. It hated all of us. Every human being. But it was stuck here. And it would lash out at what it could. Me, I don't know how I knew this, but I just knew. I lunged for me, and I prepared myself for a painful death. Click, the light went out. Once again came darkness. Sweet, quiet, relaxing darkness. I stayed on the ground for a long moment, letting my eyes adjust as I kept my gaze fixated on where my standing lamp was. As the seconds passed, I could start to make him out. That mangled man standing by the lamp, one torn hand upon the switch as he looked down at me. I understood then. I understood what it all meant. Everything that happened. The man pulled his hand away from it and then pointed a mangled finger toward it before, very clearly, shaking his head from side to side. All I could find myself doing was nodding. He wasn't the one trying to harm me. All this time, all those instances, he was trying to protect me. That creature could only come in the light. And this mangled man had been trying to keep me safe. He didn't want someone else to repeat his mistakes. I moved out the very next day and never looked back. Whatever it was confined to that house, and, so far, nothing has come at me from another light source. However, that thing will always stick with me in my mind. Every night, in my new apartment, I made a habit of wandering around the house, making sure every light is off, every curtain is closed, and made sure to plunge myself in quiet, comforting, and safe pitch darkness.